Good morning. I'm Bob Milliman, the Academic Dean. My job is to help the faculty provide you with a high-quality education in the tradition of an excellent Bethel College experience. I'm here this morning to talk briefly about an important visit from representatives of the Higher Learning Commission scheduled for Monday, March 1st. Bethel College is a member of and accredited by the Higher Learning Commission, or HLC. HLC is one of several regional accrediting agencies recognized by the United States Department of Education. That fact of recognition is important because HLC membership then helps a college meet qualifications for receiving Title IV funds. In other words, federal financial aid. HLC actually is an association of colleges and universities in the central region of the United States. They hold each other accountable in two primary areas: quality and improvement. These two concerns of quality and improvement are detailed by standards against which institutions measure themselves. Two of these standards are of particular interest at this time. The first standard is teaching and learning, and the key word here is assessment. Put in the form of a question, this standard asks, do we continually assess student learning and make corresponding improvements in our teaching? The answer to that question is yes. The second standard is resources and planning. The key words here are finances and planning. Put in the form of a question, this standard asks, do we have the financial stability to provide you with a quality education, and have we planned to maintain that stability? The answer to that question also is yes. On Monday, March 1st, fellow colleagues from the HLC will be visiting the college to consult with us on our work with assessment, finances, and planning. Earlier this year, we reported to these colleagues about our ongoing strengths and improvements in these areas. The consultation with our colleagues on March 1st will help us be certain that we are operating well and that we are continuing to improve. The visit will consist mostly of interviews of college personnel conducted by 3 HLC representatives. Due to the pandemic, only one representative will be here in person. The others will visit us remotely. We are eager for our visitors' arrival, both in person and virtually, for we want to show off our excellence and submit ourselves to suggestions for improvement. For even a great college like Bethel College should constantly look for ways to become even better. We are also eager to show them what good hosts we can be. So please do your best to greet and help our visiting consultant. And if you are asked to be interviewed, please participate with transparency, carefully and honestly boasting about what we do well and suggesting how we could do an even better job. During my years in higher education, I have attended 5 schools as a student and have worked at 4 institutions as a professor or administrator. In other words, I have seen and taught many students and have worked with many colleagues. And you, students, and you, colleagues, rank among the best. You are truly exceptional. Therefore, I know that you will really shine for our consultants during their visit. And why shouldn't we? For we are threshers.
Yours.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of you who are still in the morning. I'm grateful to be here and grateful for this invitation. And I just must say, this is the first time I've ever presented at the U of M since I've graduated, when I finished in 2007 for my graduate school program. I have to just give the foundational information that you'll need to know, which is part of what will guide my conversation today. My heart is in Minnesota. I spent 17 years there. from my early young adult years to mid whatever years. And it was some of the best time of my life. Just some of my best friends are there. And I'm a Southerner by birth. I'm from Tallahassee, Florida. And what I'll say is, when I moved from Florida to Minnesota, people thought we were crazy, going from the heat to the bitter cold, but it worked out for us really well. And in those years, I think I've kind of learned to intertwine my Southern values with Midwestern values, which is kind of what makes up who I am today. My connection to the University of Minnesota is a long one, and it's where I found what I feel like my calling is in life, and is a career in restorative justice. And it's not a career, but it's a practice, it's a way of being. And I'm so proud of my Minnesota roots in this field. So I just want to start by talking about my roots. So this is me, I think, late 60s. I think I was 2 or 3 years old, and I'm standing in my grandmother's front yard. And this picture is one of my favorite pictures of me as a child. As I mentioned, just being Southern, there were certain ways that I was raised to be, and they very much feed into this journey that I've been on, which you're going to hear about the latest iterations of that. I was raised by a teacher, that third grade teacher that you loved, that you knew would go to the nth degree for you. That was my mother, Dorothy Adams. And my father, Ernest Adams, was the city of Tallahassee's first African-American firefighter. He retired as a deputy chief for the city of Tallahassee Fire Department in the late 90s. And I recently lost him, and the city just paid amazing homage to him in this time, recognizing what he had endured in those years to do what he had to do to keep his position, but mostly to be a trailblazer. Both of my parents were that. And coming out of I'm a civil rights baby, and so all that was poured into me was kind of what I was carrying with me when I came to Minnesota in the late 80s. And so in that time, and pursuing my career and figuring out what I would do with myself, as I started to learn about restorative justice, that first classroom experience in 1993, I was 8 months pregnant with my oldest child. And that was the first time I heard those two words, restorative and justice, put together. And two words that I would never think would be put together by Dr. Mark Umbright. And over time, Dr. Umbright took me under his wing and mentored me into the field. I will forever be grateful to him for that. And my life has forever changed because of my connection with him and the Center for Restorative Justice and Peacemaking in the School of Social Work at the U of M. And I made the most amazing connections over time in my time as a student at the U of M. And then after working for the center as a trainer and associate of the center doing various projects, it has been a joy. I say all of this to say that the marriage of all of what I had connected to the civil rights movement, connected to my time as someone who, as a person of color, as a Black woman from the South, from the Deep South, trying to fit in Minnesota. And at the time when I moved to the Twin Cities, I think Minneapolis had a demographic of African American community of 5%. Now, we did not understand where to live when we moved there. So we moved to what looked like Florida to us, the city of Edina. I went days without seeing another person of color, and I couldn't understand it. And of course, over time, learning the city and learning where I wanted to be and who I wanted to be near and what gave me energy, we moved to the city of Minneapolis. I moved on the north side of Minneapolis, contrary to some of the protests of some friends who said I should not live in that area. That is an area where there's a lot of trouble, a lot of activity, crime happens. I will tell you, my experience as a woman of color living on the north side was rich. It was vibrant. I felt safe. I made friends from all walks of life, and I would never change that if I had to go back and do it all over again. And all of this is part of my journey as I started to shape my time as someone learning about restorative justice and major roles of people who are on the north side who were doing restorative justice work at that time. Some of you may know some of those people, some of you in the Twin Cities. One of the people that comes to mind is Alice Lynch. God rest her soul. She passed away a few years ago. But she is one of those people, one of those North Siders that gave me hope that I could do this, and the ways that she did her work on the North Side and with communities of color, but also with white folk. When I started to think about what I wanted to do with my education, I had to write a master's thesis. The master's thesis that I chose to write about was involving this knowledge that I had involving the civil rights movement and how I believe that the civil rights movement paved the way for the modern day restorative justice movement. You see, the restorative justice language, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, gives a name to the struggle. It gives a way to repair harm to the things that people have experienced coming out of the civil rights movement and Jim Crow and all the ways that people have been marginalized historically in this country, especially for those who are the descendants of slavery. And so when I started to think about that way that came together for me, we start to live in times where so much has been happening in our community. So much of the ways that we are still living in a lot of what my ancestors have lived in today. And I'll continue talking about that, but I want to pause to talk about what restorative justice is. For those of you who may have some knowledge or may not know at all, I want to share a definition by a colleague and friend, and he is someone who's called the grandfather of restorative justice, Howard Zehr, Dr. Howard Zehr. He says, restorative justice is a process to involve, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in a specific offense and to collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and put things right as possible. Now, he shares this definition, and this is kind of the definition that many people in the field draw from to talk about what this is from a Western context. Dr. Fania Davis is another person who is a leader in the field and is doing restorative justice work. A large part of it is through her work with youth and the restorative Justice for Oakland Youth organization that she founded. She is now retired as their director, but she is very much at the heart of their work. What I will say about Dr. Fania Davis is that she talks about restorative justice in the way that she says, restorative justice recognizes this, rooted as it is in indigenous principles of healing and reconciliation. It seeks crime as damage, as harm to relationships, and justice therefore must heal that damage and repair that harm. Restorative justice seeks to heal the harm rather than replace it. One of the things that I look at when I have been thinking about how the lenses that we look at a specific discipline, especially for those of us who are people of color, often come through a Eurocentric lens. And what I'm really hoping is that we can transcend beyond what we've been taught in ways that predominantly white communities see things, especially seeing harm as it relates to restorative justice, and look at it from many lenses, and one of which is through the lenses of people of color. One of the things that I am interested in doing is really expanding what restorative justice is beyond the textbook definition, but really to think about it in terms of how it relates to all people. I do want to say that at its core, restorative justice is a concept, an idea that comes from indigenous roots. It comes from the indigenous people of this country and beyond. I have a colleague, Dr. Edward Valandra, who talks very eloquently about the ways that we look at restorative justice, and how America, as we are trying to grapple with how we come together and how we overcome historical harm, one of the first harms is the ways that our country has been divided because of the ways that they have ignored indigenous people. And so until that first harm is dealt with, America will not overcome some of the historical harm, and then obviously the historical harm that it has in overcoming how we overlook slavery, how we don't acknowledge those who have come from slavery, and how we reconcile today by acknowledgement and reparations. And so all of that to say that we are in a time where, due to recent events, right now, we're cracked open. And when I say that, I mean, for a long time, I've been having these conversations with white people. And not to say that people haven't been listening, because they have, but I think in larger numbers, we are hearing from and seeing people, and some people are seeing us for the first time. And when I say us, I mean people of color, specifically Black and brown people. And I feel like it's a time when people are saying, I'm listening, I'm tuning in, how can I change these things? And so I want to talk about a publication that recently came out. I wrote a chapter in a book, and I'm just going to hold it up, and I'm hoping this is a full screen for you. It's called Colorizing Restorative Justice, Voicing Our Realities. This book is written by practitioners in the field of restorative justice, people of color who have talked about their journeys in the field and how they are grappling with the different walks that they have with relationship to the work. I wrote a chapter called Calling Out Whiteness. And what I mean by that is when I consider some of the places that I've been, I think about coming to Minnesota after being in a very diverse community, growing up in a diverse community all my life, and coming to places where I'm the only one, often being, whether it be in a classroom or a place of work or in my community, just where I live, and what that has been like for me. In talking about living in an all-white space, doing my work in an all-white space, being a student in an all-white space, what I've learned and come to realize is that because I lived in this environment for a long time, I didn't attribute a lot of what I was feeling. And even as I was writing this chapter, it occurred to me one day, oh my gosh, what I'm experiencing is a form of trauma. When I'm in an all-white space, and depending on how long I'm in an all-white space, it starts to wear on me. And I'm gonna say it like this. I was having a conversation with someone talking about this presentation, and I realized, if you can recall what it's like to be on a job interview and know that every word that you're saying is being evaluated, every body movement, every way that you are trying to convey your ideas and experiences is being scrutinized. For some people, especially people of color, when you are in an all-white space, it can be like being on a job interview all day. If you are working in an all-white space where you don't get to integrate with people of color, and you're the only one, you're always seen, you're always heard. When you're present, it's noticed. When you're absent, it's noticed. All of that plays into what I consider to be somewhat like a traumatic experience, because you're always on. Does that mean I'm being fake? No, but it does mean that I'm aware. It means that I'm kind of acting in excess in some ways, because I know that I'm the different one. And so with that, that's what, for me, being in all white spaces looks like, feels like, and in some ways, I do not live in a society where I want to stay in this trajectory. That is why I call this chapter Calling Out Whiteness, because I do believe that when I talk about it, I really am saying that, and I'll quote from the book, when I say, over the years, I've become more emboldened to call out whiteness and white privilege in many settings, most especially in the spaces where I am working as a practitioner of restorative justice. By saying that I call out whiteness, I mean that I inform those who are in power or leadership that as a person of color, I recognize that the creation of predominantly white work settings is a form of white supremacy, and I ask them to recognize it as well. And so that, to me, is what this whole idea of calling out whiteness is. and I have just become less concerned about feeling like I can't do that. I'm going to lose something if I say something about it. What I really want people to understand is when we have situations where they're all white in 2020, there's something egregiously wrong about that. In the United States, one of the things that I've been doing is I've been reading a lot on this topic called the browning of America. There's even some writings on it if you Googled the browning of America. But the idea that we are in the United States, you would think that white is something that is predominant throughout the world based on what you see here. But really, white is a minority in the world. But in the United States, we don't live like that. Experts say that in about 30 years, we will probably be transformed. We will have transformed the ethnicities in the United States to where white will be a minority. So thinking about that, my hope is that folks would keep that in mind as they consider when all white spaces convene, and I don't believe that it's a conspiratorial thing, but I do believe that intentionality can make changes when it comes to what all white spaces look like. One of the things that I ask people to consider in my chapter is asking yourselves, what can you do to transform these spaces? And so I think about this in a way of using restorative justice as a way to dismantle all white spaces. And I think about that in terms of how we want to do it with care. We're not trying to, I don't think, unless I'm not heard, I am hoping that when I am expressing and calling out whiteness, that it's honored in that understanding of others in whatever community I'm in, that they would want to know how to dismantle. And so I'm hoping that people would walk forward as a partner in this. And so I'm going to talk more about that shortly. First, it is about naming the situation. I've often been asked to be a part of a project, be part of an organization, and sometimes I'll evaluate just simply by who's involved, who's part of this effort. And if I see that the majority of the folks there are white people, then my inclination might be to decline. Not always, but in some instances I've chosen to decline. And I'm even fair in my ways of talking about that. I choose my words in ways that I'm inviting people to consider the alternatives. This may be a situation where I might be able to be talked into joining or be partnering or whatever, if I know that the intention of the folks is to transform that space. And maybe I might be inclined to bring partners in that are people of color. But I also encourage those who haven't considered people of color to be a part of that particular effort or community to consider that also. I shouldn't be the only one bringing in people of color. And I think that's another challenge with being in situations where they're all white is that the people of color are often the ones who it's incumbent upon to make those overtures to bring in other people of color, and not the responsibility of the white folk. I do consider education to be important. And when I say education, it doesn't mean you have to go back to school or take a course. I do believe education and training in various ways, anti-racism training being one of the major ways that we can develop a way of dismantling all white spaces, because we're thinking in ways. As a baseline, I think that we owe it to ourselves, if we haven't taken a training of any kind, an anti-racism training, and let me be clear, it's anti-racism and not diversity training, not a lot of other named things that kind of hint at anti-racism, but really don't go to the heart of it. An anti-racism training is going to teach the folks in the spaces how to look at what white supremacy is. They're going to look at ways to dismantle white supremacy. They're going to name the ways that it exists structurally. Those are important elements of any anti-racism training. And understanding that racism is systemic. It's not just someone saying a name or being ugly to someone else. Although that's not to say that that doesn't exist, but it's to say that it's because systems are set up in a way that privilege white people as superior to people of color, and the ways that over time, historically, that the distance between people of color and whites has continued to grow and grow. So with that, it's incumbent upon all people, I believe, to take anti-racism training. I say that to people of color as well as white people. I do think for white people, I have seen where the people of color lean in and do all the things necessary to gain the knowledge, to understand what this is, and white people opt out. It seems like it's an optional thing for white people, but the reality is it's important for everyone. And it's a baseline. Anti-racism training is not the cure, it is just the start. So assembly and participation of diverse groups of people. So thinking about what that looks like. One of the things that I really encourage people to do is think about the projects that you have when you are starting a project. There's a natural inclination to pick the people you enjoy working with. There's nothing wrong with that. We all do that. But I believe thinking in ways that are anti-racist, we're going to look at how can we be as inclusive as possible in bringing together people who look through all different types of lenses in order to make a project or an effort great. And if we're not doing that and we're just defaulting to the people that make us happy, a lot of times, especially for white people, that can be a situation that produces an all-white group. And then the rub is that there's someone who may say, oh my goodness, we overlooked and we forgot we need to make this diverse. So when do I get a call? When all the decisions have been made and it's all ready to be tied up except that last little bow hasn't been put on. And then they want me for window dressing. I call that the sprinkle effect. We all like donuts, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm a Krispy Kreme fanatic. I think Krispy Kreme died in Minnesota, and I was really sad about that. But anyway, we all love a good donut with sprinkles on it. And that's what happens in some of these communities where they sprinkle a little diversity to show, hey, we're diverse. Now, some of the sprinkles is one sprinkle, which is really sad, but it's the idea that that is not inclusive. The sprinkle effect is not inclusive. The sprinkle effect should not exist because it's still playing into the white ways that things are done. If we're really considering how we build a project, we're going to include those people from the ground up. Their voices matter and count at the beginning, at the inception of a project. It's going to require commitment to process. I do think that when we talk about how we do these things, I do believe that process, a restorative one, in my opinion, is important. I don't know what people know about restorative processes, and I don't have a lot of time to share, but I do wonder for many of you if you've ever participated in a talking circle. And when I say circle, I mean it physically, people sitting in a circle, people using a talking piece as the way to guide the conversation. So whoever has the talking piece has the floor. And so when we don't have the talking piece, we are not speaking, we are listening, and we're listening very intently. Being fully present is important in the circle process. One of my teachers expressed it like this. He said, you listen with generosity, meaning you give your best ear. You give you are fully present to hearing what someone has to say. And then you're generous in what you share, not by using many words, but by using your very best words and speaking with intentionality. The last thing that I would say about dismantling all white spaces is partnering with accomplices. I know that we talk a lot in anti-racism work about having allies. I'm not against allies, but I want to get people to think up the next level. An ally is someone, in my opinion, does great at understanding and partnering with people of color and hearing their experiences and expressing empathy. But I believe an accomplice is someone who is lockstep. I go where you go. I'm willing to take a hit if you have to take one. And I'm willing to go to jail if you have to go to jail. And that's how it was in the civil rights movement. When people had accomplices, and they don't talk about them very often, but when it happens, it means that maybe that white person might lose their lives. Like, for instance, Viola Gregg Liuzzo, a white civil rights activist and mother of 5, traveled to Alabama in March 1965 to help the Southern Christian Leadership Conference led by Dr. Martin Luther King with its efforts to register African American voters in Selma. Not long after her arrival, Liuzzo was murdered by members of the Ku Klux Klan while driving a Black man, Leroy Moton, from Montgomery to Selma. Moton survived the attack by feigning to be dead. Liuzzo was the only known white woman killed during the civil rights movement. And I'm not suggesting that what you will do in terms of being an accomplice will get you killed, but I am suggesting that for many white people, when things get tough for our friends of color, if your intention is to help, then you must lean in. You must be willing to risk discomfort. And unfortunately, that is where a lot of white people have failed, communities of color. and people of color as individuals by checking out, by saying this is hard, by backing out of projects because things don't look the way that it should look from a Eurocentric perspective, by saying no when if a yes could be the survival of someone's business. By saying yes, it could mean that maybe I take a hit, but I can afford it. But this other person, it's about their survival. So in that way, there's a desire to be in community, close community with those who are people of color, knowing that being white has its own privilege, and sometimes it requires that connection to raise up people of color. One of the things that has been bittersweet of late is the passing of Representative John Lewis. My heart is full when I think about his work, his commitment. I lament because I never got the opportunity to meet him, but I did live in the state of Georgia for years, and I just took for granted the opportunities that I had to go to his office or talk to him in community because he was there. And for many people that met him or got maybe even knew him, if someone's on this call that knew him, I know that he would have talked to me. I know that he was that kind of person that would have engaged. He talks so much about this idea of good trouble. And he says, do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. I think about that in these times, and I'm going to say that when I heard about what happened to George Floyd, something broke in me. Here is a person who lived in a place that is nothing but joy in my heart. When I hear Minneapolis, I think of so many happy times. And when I saw what I saw, I thought, no way. First, I saw a clip of the incident. And then it was revealed that someone had videoed the whole thing, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I made myself watch it in full. And I looked at that video for reasons that I felt like it was my duty, and not because I want to play into the sensational parts of this, but because I thought about Mamie Till, the mother of Emmett Till, who was murdered brutally in 1955 in Mississippi, young man. And when his mother in Chicago got his body, and she told the funeral, the people who funeralized him to leave the casket open because I want the world to see what they did to my baby. And in the same way, I watched until I knew that this man had no breath left in his body. I watched him fight, and it was horrible. And when all of these officers picked up his body and dumped it on the gurney like a piece of trash, it just made me so broken. And then I'm not saying that I saw this in everyone's faces, but that officer who stood on his neck, he got up, he stood up, and it looked like it was another day at the office, ready to move on to the next thing. And for me, it was just it helped me to understand that if I ever had a doubt that white supremacy isn't a thing, this was the moment that I knew for sure that this is real, that there are people who walk this earth, white people who walk this earth, who do not value Black lives, who do not believe that a Black life is worth saving, that do not believe that a Black life is equal to theirs. So when I hear people talk about Black Lives Matter, and they have this way of saying, well, all lives matter, or why do you have to say that? I don't have a choice but to say that, because for me, I want to feel like you see me. This chocolate brown skin, when I'm in an all white space, it is seen. There is no way you can look through me. I am not translucent, but I have been treated as if I'm invisible at times, which is so crazy, because I am nothing. If I am nothing, the melanin in my skin suggests that I am visible. If I don't say a word in a room of all white people, I am visible. And so I matter, I count. I am a human being, equal to any person in the room. And so the fact that we are still in times where that is an issue when we say Black Lives Matter, until all the white people in my sphere say that is true, I will continue to call out whiteness. I will continue to talk about the ways that we dismantle it. I will continue to be unapologetically vocal about these things. I do believe that ultimately it is up to you. It is up to everyone to think about what work they must do in order to make changes, to consider how to be anti-racist. There is no one way to be anti-racist. I have a professor friend who said that, and I thought that was so profound. I wish I could give you an equation and it was that easy for some of you. Some of you feel like you need that. I say the fact that you have to struggle to figure it out, and it means different things for different people, I think that is important. That is important work, and it is the most important self-work that you will ever do, to figure out how to get along with your neighbor, especially if your neighbor looks very different from you. And so when you look at that and you decide, I'm willing to do the work, it's not just, as my friend and I joked the other day about, you can't watch the movie The Help and come back and say, what can I do? You're gonna have to do the work. The work means you're gonna have to ask some uncomfortable questions of people you're in relationship with, not the people you don't know. And you're gonna have to be careful to not wear out the one Black friend or the few Black friends or the few people of color that you have in your life. Part of it is making new relationships and forging ahead to develop a great understanding, mutually respectful relationship with more people of color. At the end of the day, we are at a time, as I said earlier, that we are cracked open. that people are listening and checking in ways that they never have. And I'm excited about these times. I'm certainly not excited about the fact that it's all happening within the time of a pandemic, but so be it. I believe that in this moment, we will be more than remiss if we don't take advantage of opportunities to connect and to grow. I think the fact that you're in this time, and even as we are socially distanced and sheltering in, there are ways to be connected to people and people you have never been connected to before. And I challenge you to make new friends with intention and a desire to reconnect with self in ways, and ask those questions of yourself about how you want to be and how you want to make changes internally that would impact the ways that we help each other in this world, because most people who are connected to this probably do work in community where you are helping other people, you are serving other people, you're giving services to other people. And so if it's not through these lenses that you are looking at, then I just challenge you to make those changes, to think differently. I'm going to stop here. I know I'm about at the hour mark, and I know that there are people who've been asking questions, and I can quickly shift into that. But I am grateful for this opportunity. I didn't share nearly as much as what I wanted to share, but I hope it will inspire you all to read and to research. Please feel free to be in contact with me. I thank you so much for this time that we can be together.
And thank you, Cheryl. I think I speak for everyone when I say you are a powerful speaker and a powerful person, and thank you for sharing. Did you want to share your video clip right now, or should we wait for
Yes,
that and go into some questions?
I do want to share that. And
Okay.
let's go ahead and share that, and it will kind of share my sentiment, and I'll say a few things after that.
Sure. Could I ask you to stop your screen share, please?
Yep.
Thank you. One moment, everyone. I get a chance to do what I asked everyone else.
I'm a young black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but I look around and I see what's being done to my kind. Every day I'm being haunted as prey. My people don't want no trouble. We ain't fighting no struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me. I just wanna live. I just wanna live.
I just wanted to play the beginning of that video because I could listen to that's the way that that young man is expressing himself in his Blackness, an expression of wanting to live. I think this young man could have sung that song 50 years ago. He could have sung that song 150 years ago. I think the challenge is that we are still singing that song today. And I just ask that we think beyond, I just want to live. And it's sad, it's scary, it's ironic, but I think that is where we are as a country. that we have to value the lives of all people to the extent that it is not an impassioned plea, but it is an acceptance that we all deserve to prosper. We all deserve rich lives, and in the ways of being able to thrive in this country. So in that, I wanted to leave you with that expression, and thank you again.